Chris Willard, I'm so excited to chat with you this afternoon. I thinking about it. I heard about your work first at the National Kids Yoga Conference many, many years ago,
That's
right?
right.
And it turns out you live not far away. I remember speaking to you when I was a PTO president years ago to see,
Uh-huh.
getting your work into our districts. And then the other day I was thinking I'm going to go check out your books in the library, right? Because I have this gorgeous book Breathing Makes It Better with one of my favorite people, Wendy O'Leary. I've just met her this year and I love
Oh,
her.
beautiful.
She's
Yep.
definitely a kindred spirit. But then there's like all these other books that you have. And so those of you listening, there's like I have a stack of at least 8 books that are both for grown-ups and for children. I had no idea the depth of work that you've been involved in. And I especially love how much of your work is in collaboration, especially your picture books are in collaboration with others, which I think is spectacular. And one of the
Yeah.
things I really respect about your work, Chris, is the depth of work within the mindfulness field. You don't skim the top. You really have dug deep in your career to allow those of us in education and parenting around the world to sort of look at, okay, here's what a lot of people are saying about mindfulness and practicing, but you're taking it that step further to allow us to explore at a deeper level. So thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy that we're chatting. We should have even just done this at like outside or at my office or your office since we're so close. But this
Right. Yeah,
is
yeah. I know the
yeah.
personal connection is nothing better than seeing each other in person, right? Versus, yeah. So I
Yeah.
want to dive deep into this idea of, how do we teach mindfulness with this sense of depth and creativity and cultural relevance, especially right now, right? And so
Yeah.
to start, I'd love to explore this idea of what are these myths of mindfulness? That
Yeah.
if you could stand up and say, you know what, here's what mindfulness is, but also here's what mindfulness is not. What are you hearing in the field?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that it is in some ways easier than we think. And I think we have this kind of like split in terms of a challenge of like, how do we make this accessible without watering it down and to keep some depth to it? How do we not sort of fall into mindfulness kind of thing, as there is a critique in general around mindfulness in the US or in the West, and certainly around kids. And one thing I heard someone say once, and I wish I could remember who it was, but it was something about kind of like, well, it's developmental. Like if you expect a 5-year-old to sit still for 25 minutes on a cushion or go off on a retreat, like that's like as foolish as thinking you're going to teach a 5-year-old like calculus. Like you have to start with one plus one, right? And then
Yes.
you do, arithmetic, and then you do pre-algebra, and then you do algebra, and then you do, pre-calculus, and you do calculus. And they're like 16 if they ever do calculus. Actually, most of us are fine having never done great in calculus. And I think the same is true of mindfulness, that we can actually start simple. It can start with just breathing and making
Mm.
kind of fun breathing. And then kids like training wheels, I mean, if like my book, Alpha Breath, it's like start with, hot
Yeah.
chocolate breath and hold up your hands and imagine you're breathing and
Yeah.
filling and blowing out, cooling off. And then,
Yeah.
my son's now older. He doesn't have to hold up his hands. He can just sort of imagine the hot chocolate. And in another year or two, it'll be like just knowing what it's like to regulate his breath. And then it can be just focus on your breath and watch your breath and notice what thoughts come up as you do. And so it's like it can be actually this developmental trajectory that, like, yes, it starts with what looks like mindfulness as doing a hot chocolate breath or an alligator breath, but actually is actually just step one. And we think that kids are going to be able to learn, like, oh my gosh, jump right in, to some like sitting still for a long period of time. That's not realistic. It's not developmentally appropriate. It's also not fun. We want to make this fun just as much as we want to make this helpful. And so all of that, I think, is really important, especially as we think about teaching kids and folks like you and I, who, are often teaching more vulnerable kids who are, struggling with mental health or are neurodivergent or are kind of managing bigger things and bigger emotions. We got to start, even more simply in some ways to make it accessible. And so, and then, like I said, like not everyone learns calculus and is okay. Not everyone actually learns how to sit still for hours on end. And actually, that's okay. If you've learned just how to regulate your breath, awesome. If you've learned to spend 5 minutes listening to sounds, awesome. right? And like maybe if you've learned how to, sit still and sit, walk, sit for a full day retreat or something, okay, that's awesome too. But again, like that's not necessarily going to be for everybody. And it took me a while to step back from that, like, no, teaching mindfulness
Mm.
with kids means every kid is going to be going on a retreat just like I did. Like, no,
Right.
they'll be okay if they don't. They'll actually be
Yeah.
like, it's meeting people where they are and pushing them to where they can get to. And I think shifting to that stance, I think, is really important. And we're not losing anything when we do that.
Right.
It's important to remember too.
And what I'm hearing from you here is that we're meeting people where they're at, whether they're young or grown up or wherever they are. So, a lot of us grown-ups sort of think, "Oh my gosh, why haven't I done this?" So this sort of shame and blame, like, why don't I know about it? I hear about it, but how do I do it? So there's a lot of like, oh, I have to go on a retreat. I have to sit cross-legged on the top of the mountain, or, I can't sit still, or, there's
Right.
lots of I don't have time, or it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that way, right? And to your
Right.
point about it starts with a breath. And that is powerful for us as grown-ups as much as it is for the children. And for us to think creatively. So both creatively, those hot chocolate moments, or yesterday I
Mhm.
was trying to think about a creative way to, learn the three-part, to teach the three-part, like the take three in and then out. And I was thinking, say to my daughter, oh, it could be like walking up a slide and then down the slide. But like even that's helpful for grown-ups. And then that
Totally.
second
Yep.
piece, what I'm hearing from you is that it doesn't have to be necessarily just sitting. I find the biggest opportunities for mindfulness is when I'm sprinting on a treadmill.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
think about anything else, right? You're
Right.
absolutely in the moment.
Right. Totally. That's been a funny sort of like journey for me, is like I sort of started with, I was so interested in mindfulness, and then sort of like ended up working with kids and like how to make this for kids. And then I was like, I don't have enough gravitas. Like this is like, like
Right.
teaching kids isn't really teaching mindfulness. And like, and then actually really you're teaching, deeper, kind of practice or deeper wisdom. And then over time, like as I started to work with both adults and kids, like realizing actually my work, actually getting my feet wet trying to teach kids to sit still and practice a little bit of mindfulness has actually like made me such a better mindfulness teacher for adults. And like I don't
Mm,
have to like have a ton of gravitas. I just have to be myself. Like,
right.
and I'm a little
Yeah.
goofy, and like I'll maybe make a little bit of an off-color joke or something, or a little bit irreverent with adults. And actually that helps me get buy-in with those adults who are a little irreverent, who are probably like how I was when I started out. And there's people that are going to want a real kind of gravitas, super serious, mindfulness or Zen teacher or something. And I'm not their guy, and that's okay. But actually, like that's been, learning how to work with kids has actually made me more playful as a teacher, which I think has actually made
Mm.
me able to make these practices more accessible to everybody, not just
Mm.
to, a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, who might be like, what the heck is this? Or totally rolling their eyes at me. And I feel so grateful for that, actually.
Yeah.
And now I get to teach adults, too, and I don't worry too much about the gravitas I have right don't have. So
Yeah. Yeah, let's continue that thread because one thing that's unique about you is you work one to one, right? In your clinic. Am I right?
I work one to one, but I also do a lot of
Group.
workshops
Yes.
for parents, for educators, for
Right.
kind of the general public too, around
Yeah.
just sort of mindfulness in life and a few other, I understand, mindfulness and recovery and addiction and things like that. But sort of generally, I
Right.
feel so lucky I get to do, so many different kinds of practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're seeing, right? There isn't a one size fits all with mindfulness. So I'm curious about, what are you offering for how do we make it relevant to the different populations, right? This isn't a vanilla,
Mhm.
here's what it is, go do it. This is how do we connect deeper to you were talking about children who maybe have some extra things they're working with, right? So it could
Yeah.
be anxiety or depression or anything like that, or it could be cultural or economic differences, right?
Right.
Or trauma, right? Trauma
Yeah.
informed. So how have you found is the most effective? You talk about being playful, but is there anything else that you use to make it relevant for them?
I think being playful, I think, being, again, sort of kids, like sort of being, sort of this idea of like child-led parenting. And it's like, but it's also like child-led mindfulness teaching. And that actually has helped me to then like slow down with adults too and be like, oh, this is client led, this is student led, this is patient led, and I think especially as
Mm.
it relates to trauma, anxiety, some things that are particularly hard for some people to be, kind of approaching it with that, like, well, what is comfortable for you? Not like, push, 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 push all the way through, but like, how can, we help you? I remember, asking a teacher a million years ago, how long should I sit? And they're like, sit for as long as you can and then one more breath, right? But that
Right.
kind of
Right.
approach is like how we really, like, that to me is a really trauma informed approach, a really mental health aware informed approach that we can use with a lot of people. So it's like challenging them, but not pushing them like way outside of their comfort zone into their danger zone. We're still staying in our safety zone,
Mm.
in a sense, and that feels really important to be able to do. And that too came actually out of starting this work, oftentimes with kiddos.
Mm.
So yeah, that's been interesting for me to kind of stumble into too over time as I work with different kinds of people. But is adapting, like I had the privilege recently of doing a talk at Cambridge Insight, or like an afternoon practice. Actually, I did two. I did one sort of like mindfulness and addiction, and one that was sort of like self-compassion and addiction. But like being able to adapt sort of some self-compassion phrases to integrate sort of like some, recovery 12-steppy language, like, may I accept the things I cannot change, may I, be kind to myself and recognize my progress and not, have to be perfect. Like these kinds of
Mm.
things, to adapt to that audience or to make it different for parents, like what the phrases would be, like remembering that none of us parents know what they're doing, that no kids come with instruction books, that we've all struggled and had bad days
Mm.
as parents, right? So we can shift it. And I feel so it's been a real challenge and stretch often to work with different kinds of people, but it also is wonderful to see what comes out of stretching ourselves too, that
Mm.
new practices emerge, or old practices see adaptations and stretch to fit people, rather than like, no, we're going to do the exact same phrases and you're going to like it or not. It's like, no,
Right.
let's meet people over there and work with them. And then something beautiful comes out of that co-creation from what someone is bringing and what we're in turn, kind of offering as an adaptation. So I just love it when that happens, that it's sort of this mutual
Mm.
creativity, in many ways. Yeah.
And what I'm hearing there is that you're modeling mindfulness because the way you described it is when you've got a population in front of you and you've got sort of an outcome you're hoping to get to or some tools you'd like to provide for these folks to ultimately lead happier, healthy lives. You yourself are having to ground yourself, right? To get
Right,
curious and
right.
to notice what's in the room, maybe what's underneath the surface of their feelings, and then being able to provide from there, from that place of curiosity, right? Instead of coming top down of, I'm a, educated, this is the work I've done this research and here's what we're doing. But you yourself are walking the talk, right? Talking the walk.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It is that, like, if we're, I mean, this is when I teach people how to teach, share, facilitate mindfulness over use. And I often say, like, here's a bunch of scripts, but what I want you to do is take these scripts. I got to give them to you in Word, not in a PDF, because I want you to put it into your words. If
Yeah.
you want to say breathe in, you say breathe in. If you want to say breathing, say breathing. If you want to say inhaling, say inhaling. Make it yours, right?
Right.
Because then you're embodying it. If your clients in front of you are squirming, you need to be able to adapt. And, by being in the moment, you can say, and if you notice yourself squirming, then XYZ, or, suddenly the door slams or ambulance goes by. You need to be able to be present enough to not just keep grinding through the script, but be
Yeah.
embodied enough to say, and noticing sounds and noticing how things carry your mind out, and maybe sending some loving kindness to that person in the ambulance going by. And if we're
Right.
not embodied, if we're not in the moment, if we're clutching with sweaty hands our script that we have to get
Yeah.
through, that's not going
Yes.
to happen. We're not going to be making that connection with the students or whoever it is that's in front of us that we're trying to to guide in an authentic way. It's not going to come through as authentic. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's more of a flow versus a grasping, right?
Right.
Let's continue this thread about addiction because I know I'm not alone to have a, huge passion and concern and quite frankly a fear about what's happening with the addiction with our younger folks in terms of screens and phones, right? And so, the John Haight's book that came out
Oh,
last year, The
just read it.
Anxious.
So good.
Yeah,
So
so good. The
terrifying,
Anxious
but so
Generation.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's beyond the book, right? So the movement has become, how do we reduce phone use? How do we get children off social media?
Right.
So, Chris, I've been hearing about this for the past year or so. I'm watching this movement. It's just extraordinary unfold across the world. But
Mhm.
the question that I've had heavy on my heart that I really want to ask you about because you're in it with the research is I can't help but think that mindfulness can play a part between, okay, great. So we've got children, unless the schools, or a collective action take away the phones, unless we, talk to the social media companies and it goes away. What do we do as families and educators to help in the interim, to find that middle ground, to help our children regulate, right? So great. I don't want my child on the phone. But as you talked about, neurodivergent, is all these other issues that are going on for kids. Some kids can get off easily and some kids cannot, including my
Right.
own, right? So, have you seen any research around mindfulness assisting or guiding children to kind of build their own inner regulation? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how to manage these phones in a safer, healthier way?
Right. I mean, mindfulness in a sense is awareness. And so having more awareness, I think, is really useful.
Mm.
Awareness of us adults, how much are we on our phones, which I'm trying to set a better example about in my family.
Yes. Yeah.
Talking awareness, I saw, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her name right now, actress, but on a podcast talking about how she just models in front of the kids. Oh, my phone, it's it's so tricky. It always like drags me back, right? It's so they
Mhm.
built it so that it hooks me. Like, I'm sorry, you guys, like, so that she's talking about her own struggles with it. And so it's like, I love that, like modeling our own vulnerability around our devices. I think also for parents, I've got a whole talk about this actually about tech and mindfulness, but like, it's things like have a place that
Mm.
everyone puts their phones, right? Have rooms in the house where there's no phones, have places where they go, and certainly not at the dinner table, or, really be aware of like where and when in the car. Like, we're like, okay, long trips, but not short trips, like, is kind of our philosophy. So these, not in rooms, like these kinds of things, I think are really important to talk about, to name, to try to create some guidelines around. But the awareness, I think, too, that these things are designed to be addictive. And, you think about things that have been addictive in public health campaigns. I remember reading about oh my gosh, I'm blanking on what it was. It was one of the anti-smoking campaigns from like the 2000s.
Mm.
Truth is what it was called. And the reason that campaign was effective is because the hook of that campaign was they are trying to trick you. It's these old guys sitting around trying to trick you, trying to hook you on cigarettes that they know are addictive, and they're aiming it at kids and they're trying to trick you. Don't get tricked. And that, like, of all the campaigns, smoking is bad for you, smoking is this, smoking is that, that was one of the most effective because no one likes to be tricked. No one likes to feel like they're being
Mm.
manipulated.
Oh,
And
I
so
love
we
that.
educate kids that they are being manipulated and that we too are
Yeah.
being manipulated with the choice of the red dot. It's not green. That's for a reason that it's red, right? All of these kinds of things. Like the kids that are like, okay, this is trying to hook me. Now I can make it a game to not get hooked or not get as hooked. So I think that's really empowering. And then I think too, mindfulness, like there was some different practices that I do in workshops sometimes around just like, you know, pick up your phone. I mean, almost like a mindful eating or something practice, but like pick up your phone, notice the weight in your hands, like notice
Mm.
as you lift it up, that strong desire to check it. Notice that it didn't used to turn on automatically, but now there's a feature you have to turn it off, where if you lift the phone up, the screen goes on. Actually, you have to take the time to turn it off, right? So you lift it up and it often turns on, and then it shows you the little red dots. Notice the sensations, the urges going along with that. And then
Oh, I
maybe
love that.
take a moment, close your eyes, notice the urges fade. There's a wonderful addiction practice called urge surfing that Alan Marlatt developed, right? But urges actually they fade away, like feelings, like everything else, right? And then click on social media or click on a news website. Notice the first emotions that come up. Usually jealousy, right? Why are they on vacation? Why are they so good looking? Why did they get more? Right? Notice that. Okay, now close your eyes, like let it fade away. Okay, now click on the next, scroll to the next, update, and you start to notice how many emotions you feel just with each post. And you think about scrolling, and it's like a fire
Mhm.
hose of whether you're reading the news and it's all negative news, or you're looking at social media and it's all friends doing this or celebrities doing that. Like it just brings more awareness. And then notice
Mm.
how you feel before, during, and after. I feel kind of crappy afterwards, like
Yes, right.
oftentimes. Judd
Yeah.
Brewer, I just read his book. He kind of talks about this a little bit too. But like I really like that kind of practice, and for us adults to do it as well
Yeah.
as kids. And to talk about it, what a struggle it is for us adults. Help.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I love
sorry,
that.
I'm talking. You asked some questions.
No, no, I love everything you said. I love that mindfulness eating. I hadn't thought of it that way, of just noticing how it feels, right? And so just in your hand, never mind looking at it. Because I'm trying to talk to my daughter about even what you're like, not all screen is created equal, right? So,
Right.
how do you feel when you're watching just a mundane television show that's been produced, right? It's nice and calm
Yeah.
and easy versus scrolling on YouTube shorts, right? And how do you feel there? But I love
Right.
what you're saying about even just put it in your hand, right? And
Mhm.
that's significant. And I love what you're saying too about the grown-ups. Oh my gosh, right? Because I was been reading like deep work, Cal Newport's, deep work and slow
Yeah.
productivity, and
Yeah.
kind of working on how to, what can I be responsible for? And oh
Mhm.
my goodness, right? It's no wonder that my child is not focused, or the children I see, because we aren't. I mean, it's
Right.
impossible these days to,
Right.
to try and do it all. And where is that coming from? Like as you say, I'm sure you're seeing this population within your addiction, right? Uncovering what's underneath the trying to do it all. Like
Mhm.
no one's going to get upset if we don't reply to them right away, right? It's okay to wait, email back in a few days, or it's okay to not have that project done
Right.
tomorrow. Like what, it's made up deadlines, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that also is not just the social media, but it's just the technology on our
Mhm.
phones too.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Another good book, I read it many years ago, is Zen Habits, Leo Babwata. It's very similar to kind of some of Cal Newport's stuff, but about how to, it was a little bit as phones were getting bigger, but kind of how to manage email flow and how to not get totally overwhelmed with screens. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago,
Mhm.
they've gotten even more difficult to manage, but that
Yeah.
was a really useful book I found in my own life. Yeah.
Yeah, and I loved Still in Focus too, because
Mhm.
he goes off for 30 days, right? And that's that mindfulness practice of, wow, like what difference does that make, And then of course, as soon as the 30 days is up, you're back at it. So it's not like any time has passed, but
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's still a good exercise, right?
Yeah.
How can we give our mind a break, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So moving on from that, I'm thinking about, okay, now how do we land the plane here in terms of how do we make this practical for folks, whether or not they've, been teaching mindfulness for many, many years, or they're just starting.
Yeah.
What are sort of your tips that you've experienced to sort of not only just meet children where they're at, but make it effective and engaging? Because what do we hear? Like, oh, mindfulness is so lame, or, I don't want to do it, the eye rolls,
Right.
like
Yeah.
we hired a mindfulness teacher one school year here in our district. And
Uh-huh.
he used to go around to every classroom for like 15 minutes. And the stories my daughter used to tell, she was in elementary school, it was hilarious. I mean, he was amazing, but
Yeah.
they're
Right.
kids, right? And
Right.
they
Exactly.
rather it's embarrassing. They don't want to be chewing on a raisin, or, or things like that. So what are sort of your tips on how do we approach mindfulness, teaching mindfulness to children?
I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that it's hard. We have to acknowledge that it's boring. And so we have to be the ones to make it interesting. I mean, like, part of what happened for me was like a kid telling me, like, many years ago, like, breathing is played out, Dr. Willard. I was like, okay, hey, all right, man. Or my son being like, Dad, breathing is boring. I'm never breathing again. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
still breathing this morning. So good news. But again, it's like, how do we make it fun and interesting? And I also like, I'm also just into positive psychology, gratitude, and then again, with other practices, sort of mindfulness adjacent compassion practices, there's a lot of talk about with gratitude, like nothing is too small. With compassion, start with, small, difficult people, not the biggest difficult person. I also feel like with mindfulness, nothing is too small. Like little
Mhm.
kids, 3 breaths, 3 alligator breaths, 3 ninja breaths, like boom. All right. If it feels like a success, great. By the time they're, when they're 5, okay, let's do 5, superhero breaths. Let's do 5, whatever, teddy bear breath, right? So that it really is always feeling like a success and builds out. And then I think different ages need different stuff. Like teenagers and tweens, like they need to know why they're doing it. They need to know that their friends are doing it. Maybe we don't have them in a circle at that age, but we have them in rows, so they're not sort of setting each other off. Well, what's everybody else doing? Is the cool kid doing it? Is my crush doing it? Right? There's that. I think making it kind of optional. I like we're gonna do a I'm going to set a timer for a minute. You can do counting sounds. You can do focusing on your breath. You can do XYZ. I'll guide us through one of those. You can do whichever one you want, or if you want to just like doodle in your notebook, you can do that. And then it's like no one has to know, whether you're
Mm.
doing it or not. And I love that like stealth mindfulness for teens and tweens in particular. And then it's also like, who is it that's teaching? Like for me as a
Mm.
parent, it's like, sure, I love doing this. My kids like it. I do a visualization before bed, or we do, this or that. I know that there'll be a point when my son, rolls his eyes at me and that day is fast approaching. But like, as long as I have it a little bit sort of like, okay, well, maybe his soccer coach, right? Or maybe,
Mhm.
the drama teacher can be there, or, his therapist is teaching him a few visualizations, or, he's got an app he can listen to, that it doesn't have to be me. I think that's also really important as a parent. I think as an educator, it's like, maybe it's not you as the classroom teacher, maybe it is going to be the art teacher for a while. But the kids are getting a little bit of it from somewhere. I think is more important than like, I have to be the one to do it. Like, learning to let go of that, I think, is really hard. But like, I'm not gonna, I mean, calculus, like, yeah, I can barely do the like pre-algebra my son is doing. Like, forget it. Like, I'm not gonna be the one to teach him that. Just like, I'm probably, just because where he'll be as a teenager in a few more years, not going to be the one to be teaching him or guiding him in mindfulness practices. That's fine. Let it be someone else.
Yeah.
And then maybe we will practice together a little bit more when we're all older, or we'll listen to some audios together of, kind of soccer mindfulness practice or whatever he's interested in at some point. So I think that's also really important for us to remember as well. Yeah.
I love that. I love it. So what I'm hearing is starting small, right?
Yep.
Every little bit counts. You're planting a seed for life, right?
Yep.
That it's age appropriate. So
Uh-huh.
teaching younger children and preschool is going to be very different than teens,
Yep.
right? And then it's an optional practice. So you're giving children choice. So there's some agency, and they
Yep.
can start to learn what coping mechanisms are suited for them, right? Based on their needs and preferences. And I
Yep.
love the fact that you're talking about our modeling too, because when I teach or sub, and oftentimes I need to take a deep breath. So,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it's sort of, I just model it and say, hand on heart, I'm just going to take a deep breath, and whoever wants to join me, join me,
Right.
and then you've done the self-compassion research around the science benefit, right? Of the hand on the heart. There's something, I don't know how to describe it, like you
It
probably can.
quiets down cortisol, which allows oxytocin, the attachment, connection, safety, love hormone to start to flow. It's really kind of amazing, this stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The oxytocin. All
Right.
right. I'm never, I hear it all the time on different pieces, but I'm always like,
What is
I got
that?
to refer to the scientist's way of saying it. Yes, the oxytocin hand on heart. And
Yeah.
that's how I get through. That's my coping to get through a teaching moment. And as you say, or even with my daughter, I'll just talk about it. Cause at first, it's just that attachment, like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, you
Right.
see these,
Yep.
on magazines, or you hear about these amazing families, probably yours, Chris, but not mine. But these children are practicing and they're zenned out and all these things, and that was
I
not
wish.
yeah, my daughter
You
is
tell me
definitely
when
my
my
baby.
son hit my daughter over the head with the mindfulness book that my wife and I wrote together. So it's like
Right.
your mileage may vary. And then we have amazing
Yes.
days, also. It's like,
Yes.
yeah.
Right. Right. But I think that, in that, right, once we can step back and not be and find a way to choose commitment over attachment,
Right.
and that we're modeling it ourselves, that, I've heard stories about my daughter, like helping another child take a few deep breaths on a
Yeah.
sleepover who couldn't get to sleep. Or I've heard from a counselor where it was like a lunch bunch when they were little, and she was helping the child who was anxious and nervous about something take a deep breath. Like, we don't know when they're out in the field what's actually going on, right? We may not see it ourselves.
Yeah.
Or my daughter's like put her hands on both of my shoulders and said, Mom, you need to take a deep breath.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's out there, and I love what you're saying too, is
Yeah.
it becomes this community collective action,
Yeah.
right? Of just spreading the good word. It's no longer like what I mean, there's still some myths about it, but
Right.
it's in the mainstream,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
tell us a story, Chris. Tell us a story of maybe a student of yours, and it could be a child or a grown up,
Mm-hmm.
how maybe the mindfulness practice, just so we can kind of hear the impact of the work.
Yeah. I mean, when I've been sharing a lot more recently, I think it's been on my mind. Is that this guy I've worked with for many years, on and off, and on for a while. And then he actually took a long break and came back recently. And that always makes me feel like, does that make me a good therapist or a bad therapist that he came back? I don't know. But we started he had just had a kid born who had like extreme developmental delays, and he kind of came to therapy at the, like, not behest but the mandate, I would say, of his wife. Like, he was just so overwhelmed by, like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? And so we worked a lot around acceptance in the first few years, and sort of, letting go of some of his sort of, like, that he'll be, kind of playing sports with his kid, and that he'll be, sort of, not having to, this kid's going to be institutionalized. And then we worked a lot on mindfulness too. And he's got a really high powered job. His wife has got a really high powered job. He's just already a kind of like high anxiety, high stress, high intensity dad. So he talked in high conflict in his marriage, just because they're both such type A's. And we kind of finished our work a few years ago, and I was like, what was the most helpful thing, as we worked together? And he was like, well, Chris, like, the most helpful thing you said was like, I leave my job, drive home, 100 miles an hour on 95. You know what that's like. We're both in the same area, right? Like,
Yes.
grinding through traffic, blasting music, like pull in, like get into the driveway and just like stop in the driveway. When I get to the driveway, just like pause, like before I race inside, just like take 3 breaths.
Mm.
Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. In, breathing back out. And then walk into the house. And the kid may be screaming. The nanny is like running out the door. My wife is at the edge of tears. And it used to be that I would just be bringing more chaos into all of that. And I don't know, Chris, if I'm bringing in calm, but at least I'm not bringing in more chaos when I do that. And to me, it was like, oh my gosh, like, it can be that simple. It can be, or for some people, it's home is calm and work is bonkers. And it's,
Yeah.
you know, hit the button for the elevator and just pause and feel my feet on the ground or notice sounds around me till the elevator gets there and I walk in and I've left, the chaos of, home behind, right? So it's, whatever it is we need, it can be these little moments where at least we're not bringing, the day with us. And John Fisher, who's a, I need to actually write to him because I don't know if he knows this. I met him once, but he wrote a book. He's a cardiologist, but he was talking about just like disinfecting as a cardiologist, like between visiting patients in the hospital. And what mindfulness lets us do is like emotionally disinfect. I'm a
Mm.
therapist. I sit with kids, adults all day. Our emotions are contagious. Anxiety is the most contagious emotion. I sit with an anxious person in my office. By the end of that session, I'm like, I got to get an alarm system like before I get home. And I got, like, because it's contagious, right? I sit with a depressed person and I'm like, oh, this is, ugh, geez, boy, things are dark. This person needs help, right? Like, again, how do I disinfect emotionally, client to client? How
Mm.
do I disinfect from the trauma, the sadness, the disorganization and dysregulation of my day before I walk in the door, and not carry that into my clients, Freudian slip, to my family at the end of the day, is so important. So even these little micro moments of pausing to emotionally disinfect, I feel like are so important, and trying to just model that to my kids, like, oh, we're coming in the door, let's take a moment. Right, all right, let's
Mm.
open the door and head inside. That can hopefully start to model some of that to them. But I've seen it just pay such big dividends with so many people I've worked
Mm.
with. Yeah.
Yeah, what a gift of a story. Because I've been reading about, so educators is the thing that are really heavy on my heart, pediatric therapists, all and moms and caregivers. And, I've been reading about this secondary trauma,
Oof.
right? And so exactly what you're saying, that, a therapist, people can say, okay, yeah, like let's look after our therapist. They're with people. But as a teacher, you didn't sign up for, and you have no training in
Oh,
how to work with
frontline mental health worker, frontline behavioral
right.
management, frontline medical worker during COVID. I mean, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
That's not, it's not expected, and there's still no support and education around it, right? And so I love what you're saying there. That's definitely a practice that we could all take, before, when you get to your classroom, before the bell goes. Give yourself that time. It's literally 20 seconds that could change the trajectory of your day. When you come in after recess, when you finish the day, how do you have that emotional cleanse at the end of the day so you can leave that there, that energy there before you go home to your family or your elderly parents or whatever, right?
Or both.
It's yeah, or both, right? And I think it's coming back to this idea of starting small and starting with your breath, something you don't need to buy more of. You don't need
Right.
any props, right? It's with you all the time. And
Yeah.
then during the day, don't you find that the more you are tuned into your breath, it then just becomes natural through the day?
Yeah.
I always
Right.
know when I'm meditating for longer because then I can feel it throughout the day more. And then when I'm
Right.
not, I think, oh my goodness,
Echoing kind of. Yeah.
yeah, it's like this ripple that
Yeah.
happens. Yeah, it's like your body almost craves it, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like a thirst, right?
Yeah.
And your breath is sort of triggering.
Yeah.
Oh, you've shared so much, Chris. I so appreciate you. It's been so great to spend this time with you. What's your kind of your last parting word of like, what's your one takeaway for, your advice for adults who, really want to deepen their own practice, want to deepen how they teach to children? What's the
Yeah.
one thing?
I mean, I feel like what I see as be like, I used to kind of roll my eyes because it's such a kind of airy fairy kind of term, but embodiment. And I
Mm.
think some people think embodiment means you have to have what a friend of mine calls a mindfulness face, which is like looking like this. And it's like embodiment just means authenticity. And it's like
Yeah.
just being yourself, keep moving, respond, don't react to the person that's in front of you, just as as you're guiding a practice, respond, don't react to if an ambulance goes by or if the kids start giggling or whatever it is. And to be responsive if they're getting squirmy. There's no harm in cutting the practice a little bit short, especially with kids, into shifting gears into something else. And because I feel like that's the mistake too many people make, is like, I'm going to ring the bell and try to do 10 minutes of silence with these kids, and it's like, yeah, okay, great. If you
Yeah.
can do that, great. Like I can't do that. But let's like figure out like what it is. And the more embodied we are, the more we're actually seeing, what's going on. Like, are they starting to squirm? Are they giggling? Are they now passing notes? Are they all like sort of like rolling their eyes when we walk into the classroom, or are they like
Mhm.
okay, I like this person. A friend of mine was like, the wind kinder, I think she was like, went into a classroom and someone was like, oh, it's the weird breathing lady. She's like,
You're
don't be the
right.
weird breathing lady. But how to just be authentic, I feel like. And sometimes it's mindfulness, and sometimes it's the kids just need to be heard, or they need a little bit of something else. But the more kind of regulated we are, the more we can tune into what's needed in that moment. We show up with our lesson plan, and some days it's silence, some days it's loudness, some days it's stretching, some days it's stillness, some days it's right. But I think the more we can be embodied, we can respond, not react to what the moment has to offer. So, yep.
I love that. Yeah. And I think too, I've been on my mind, I've been researching a lot about anger, which is a new topic for me. It's just sort of bubbling up for literally.
Oh,
And, I think it's also not just looking for a response versus reaction, but also when we are reactive, it's how we respond to the reaction, isn't it?
right,
Right. Like,
right.
whoa, I had an incident recently where I don't know, it came from my belly and I was like,
Yeah,
my time was just like had enough, those
right,
moments. And then
right.
it sort of came up quickly and then went quickly. And I put my hand, I was like, wow, I don't know. And I said to my daughter, I don't know where that came from, like,
Yeah,
but I think it's, how do what happens after, we do screw up? We're going to be impatient. We're going to lose it. And I
yeah,
think that's where mindfulness offers us this, like, as you say, self-compassion,
right.
right? That it's okay. We can lose it. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Chris. I so appreciate you. So what's next for you? How do we find you online?
Yeah, like I said, two books come out recently. I have College Mental Health 101, which I wrote with some
Ooh,
friends.
very important work.
It's like
Very,
there's almost
very.
nothing. It's like resources, it's quizzes, it's like just answers to like hundreds of questions, like, how do I pick a school? Should I pick a near or far school? How do I find a therapist at college? How do I, deal when people are asking me for my medications? Just like things like that. And that's sort of for the bigger kids. And then I've been saying for littler kids, but really for all ages.
Ooh.
Like farts, they linger but never last. They usually feel better if you just let them out.
I
Finally,
love
after
it.
5 years, this just came out a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
So
I love
um,
it.
that's happening. And then I've got like, at Dr. Christopher Willard on my Instagram. I've got a summer intensive online. I've got a summer intensive on Cape Cod. I've got
Oh,
a fall 3-day intensive that's actually extremely reasonably priced in Portugal. If people want to come
ooh,
join me, I know it's $350. You have to get to Portugal, but after that, it's only $350.
wow.
So I'm psyched about that in September. So those are some ways, and yeah,
Great.
get in touch. I'm visiting schools and doing conferences and stopping at libraries and bookstores and stuff like that. So yeah, my
I love
Instagram
it.
sometimes is updated with some of that stuff. So um, yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much. So appreciate you,
Yeah,
Chris.
absolutely. Thank you, Giselle. This is wonderful.